Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into MindMed, a company that's exploring the world of psychedelic-inspired medicine. We've gone through tons of research reports, financial data, and market analysis to bring you the most interesting insights. And stick around because later in this deep dive we're going to connect MindMed to a surprising cultural trend you might not expect.
It's certainly a fascinating area, especially with the growing interest in using psychedelic for therapeutic purposes. MindMed is a company to keep an eye on in this emerging field.
For sure. So to start us off, can you explain what exactly does MindMed do?
They are developing medicines using psychedelics,
Okay, psychedelics like what?
like LSD, but modified to target specific mental health conditions. They're looking at things like anxiety and depression. The goal is to address the root causes of these disorders instead of just managing the symptoms, putting a Band-Aid on the problem.
Yeah, I see. One of the things that caught my attention was their work on a dissolving LSD tablet, something called MM120. What's so innovative about this product?
Well, it's all about how it's taken, the delivery method. So imagine a tablet that dissolves instantly on your tongue. You don't have to swallow any pills.
That's interesting.
This could be a really big deal for people who struggle with traditional pill forms. And plus, it could potentially lead to faster absorption and maybe even reduce some side effects.
That makes a lot of sense. So thinking bigger picture, how big is the market MindMed is trying to tap into?
It's massive, really huge potential. The global market for mental health treatments is already enormous, and the increasing acceptance of psychedelics for therapeutic use is only going to make it bigger. Millions of people struggle with things like anxiety and depression, and current treatments just don't work for everybody. MindMed is aiming to offer a totally new approach.
So MindMed isn't the only one doing this, right? Who are some of their competitors and what sets them apart?
Yeah, you're right. They're not alone. There are companies like Compass Pathways. They're focusing on psilocybin therapy for depression. And then there's ATAI Life Sciences. They're more of a platform company. They invest in various psychedelic medicine startups. Each company has its own specific focus and approach. But I think what really distinguishes MindMed is their diverse pipeline. They're not just working with LSD, but also other psychedelics like MDMA and DMT. This means they can potentially target a wider range of treatments.
So it's a competitive landscape, but MindMed seems to be finding its own way. Now, if we were thinking about investing in MindMed, we'd want to know who's in charge, right? What can you tell us about the management team?
Oh, absolutely. The leadership is super important. MindMed's CEO, Robert Barrow, he comes from a finance background, and he's got a history of building successful healthcare companies. This experience could be really valuable as they navigate the complex world of drug development and then actually getting it out there into the market.
I noticed in their communication, they really emphasize ethical research and transparency. Is this genuine or is it just good PR, especially considering the sensitivity around this field?
Yeah, ethical considerations are really, really important in this field, especially given the history and stigma around psychedelics. But MindMed does seem genuinely committed to responsible development and being open in their communication. They've even established a medical advisory board, and it's got some real experts in psychedelic research and ethics. This shows that they're serious about doing things the right way.
That's good to hear. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about their financials. What's the financial health of MindMed looking like these days?
Well, like a lot of biotech companies that are in the research and development phase, MindMed isn't making a profit yet. They're spending a lot of money on clinical trials and building up their infrastructure.
Right, that makes sense.
This is pretty normal for companies at this stage, as they're focused on proving that their treatments are both effective and safe before they can actually start making money from them.
So they're spending money to make money, so to speak. But I did notice that their debt levels are relatively low. Is that a good thing?
Low debt can be a good sign, especially in an industry that is considered high risk. It suggests they're being careful with their finances and not taking on too much debt. However, it's important to remember that they'll need to secure more funding down the line to keep their research and development going.
That's a great point. They can't just rely on investor money forever. They'll need to show real progress to attract future investment. We've been talking about MindMed's business model, management team, and financials. Now, let's look at how the market views MindMed. What's the overall sentiment surrounding the company?
The market sentiment is generally positive, although there's some caution mixed in. Investors are definitely excited about the potential of psychedelic medicine, and MindMed, with their diverse approach and experienced leadership, is getting a lot of attention. But it's still early in the game, and the company's success really depends on the outcome of those clinical trials.
That makes sense. Speaking of those trials, there's been some recent positive news that seems to be driving investor confidence. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. MindMed recently announced positive results from their phase 2 trial for their LSD microdosing therapy for anxiety. And that news really made a splash. It boosted investor confidence and their stock price went up. They've also been expanding their research partnerships, which further strengthens their position in the field.
Sounds like they're making some smart moves. Now let's talk ownership. Who are the major stakeholders in MindMed? And what does the ownership structure tell us?
Institutional investors hold a large portion of MindMed's stock, and that's generally a good sign. It means that experienced investors, those with deep pockets and expertise, believe in the company's long-term potential. Also, a few venture capital firms that focus on biotech and healthcare have invested a good amount in MindMed. That adds another layer of validation to their approach.
So a lot of confidence from those who know this space well. Are there any red flags or potential concerns regarding the ownership structure that investors should be aware of?
While institutional investment is high, insider ownership is relatively low. What that means is that the stake held by the company's management and employees is not as big. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but some investors might see it as a sign that the leadership team isn't fully committed.
It's an interesting observation. Now let's shift gears and talk about risks. Every investment has its potential downsides. What are some of the, let's call them bad trip warnings for MindMed?
Right. It's definitely important to consider the risks. One of the biggest challenges is the regulatory landscape. The process of getting approval for these psychedelic-based therapies is still developing, and there's no guarantee that MindMed will get the necessary approvals for their products.
Regulatory hurdles are a big concern. Are there any other potential threats investors should consider?
Absolutely. Competition is another huge factor. The field of psychedelic medicine is getting a lot of attention, and there are quite a few well-funded companies trying to get a piece of the market. MindMed needs to differentiate itself and execute its plans flawlessly if it wants to stay ahead.
So they're in a pretty tough spot. To get a better understanding of the full picture, let's do a SWOT analysis, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis to see where MindMed stands. Let's start with their strengths. What are MindMed's key strengths?
Well, one major strength is their diverse product pipeline. They're not just focusing on LSD, they're exploring various psychedelic compounds, which gives them a wider potential market reach. Another key strength is their commitment to scientific rigor and ethical practices. This focus on responsible development could be a big advantage for them in building trust with patients, regulators, and investors.
Those are definitely strong points. What about their weaknesses? What could hold them back?
Their biggest weakness right now is that they don't have any revenue coming in. They're burning through cash to fund their research and development, and until they have a product out there making money, they're in a vulnerable position. And the long and uncertain timeline for getting regulatory approval just adds to their financial risk.
Financial stability and that regulatory uncertainty are definitely major concerns. What about opportunities? What are some things that could really push MindMed forward?
The growing acceptance of using psychedelics for therapy is a huge opportunity. As the stigma fades and more research shows the potential benefits of these treatments, the market is set to grow exponentially. And MindMed, being an early mover with a strong research foundation, is well positioned to take advantage of this trend.
That's definitely an exciting prospect.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, threats. What are some external factors that could potentially derail their success?
One major threat is the possibility of negative results from their clinical trials. If their therapies don't work or if they're not safe, it could really hurt their reputation and investor confidence. Another threat is the possibility of unforeseen side effects or complications from psychedelic treatments. This could lead to more scrutiny from regulators or even a backlash against the whole field.
It sounds like they're walking a tightrope between incredible potential and some serious risks. After a quick break, we'll come back and give our final verdict on MindMed, and we'll reveal that surprising cultural connection we mentioned earlier. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We spent this episode learning all about MindMed, their business, their management, their financials, what the market thinks, their ownership, and the risks they face. Now, the question on everyone's mind is this psychedelic stock a trip worth taking?
Well, that's a complicated question. It's not a simple yes or no answer. MindMed is working in an area that has a lot of potential, but also a lot of uncertainty. The rewards could be huge, but so are the risks.
So if someone's thinking about investing in MindMed, what are the key things they need to remember?
The most important thing to understand is that this is a high-risk, high-reward type of investment. MindMed is still a young company, and their success hinges on a lot of things. Like good results from their clinical trials, getting regulatory approvals, and actually being able to sell their products successfully.
It's definitely not a stock for someone who's risk-averse. What advice would you give to someone who's on the fence about investing in MindMed?
I would say do your research. Don't just go by what you hear on the street or what the hype is. Really dig into the company's financial reports, read their clinical trial data, look at the management team's experience, and really understand their regulatory filings. You got to understand the science behind their therapies and the potential challenges they're up against.
Yeah, knowledge is definitely power, especially when it comes to investing. Remember at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned a surprising connection between MindMed and a cultural trend. Well, MindMed is leading the way in using psychedelics to treat mental health. And at the same time, we're seeing this huge cultural shift towards prioritizing mental wellness, mindfulness, and self-care. Do you think there's a connection there?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's fascinating how these two things are coming together. As society becomes more open to talking about mental health and looking for alternative ways to improve their well-being, MindMed's work could become even more important. Their focus on using psychedelics to help people reach their full potential and enhance mental wellness really fits in with this whole cultural shift.
So it's not just about treating illness. It's about improving mental well-being for everyone. That's a really powerful idea. As we wrap up this deep dive into MindMed, what was the most interesting thing you learned?
For me, it's their boldness. They're not afraid to challenge the traditional ways of treating mental health, and they're pushing the boundaries of what we know scientifically. Whether they ultimately succeed or not, we'll have to see, but their ambition and dedication to innovation are pretty amazing.
I completely agree. And that brings our deep dive into MindMed to a close. We hope you found this episode informative and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this kind of deep analysis and want to explore other companies and innovative ideas, make sure you subscribe to the deep dive so you don't miss any new episodes. And let us know in the comments what other companies you'd like us to cover.
And don't forget, you can find links to all the sources we talked about in the episode description. If you're interested in AI and stock analysis, check out the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel. They're doing some really cutting-edge work in that area.
As always, remember that this podcast is for informational purposes only, and it's not financial advice. Do your own research and talk to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of MindMed.